What's going on, YouTube? We're back at it for another video, and today we've got the Thorns minion build for the Necromancer. Now, the whole premise of this one was, after finding the Razorplate, almost getting a max roll on that with 11,000 when it comes to the increase to Thorns, I wanted to see whether or not I could make a minions build, since I know that the Golem and the Skeletal Warriors are going to be inheriting some of our Thorns, not all of them. I think the Skeletal Warriors are getting 40%, the Golem's getting 50%, and aspects on certain pieces of gear can further increase this percentage of Thorns that they can actually inherit from us. Wanted to see if I can get a build together that had enough damage resistance to it, as well as giving us the tankiness to our minions to be able to take those hits and then just kill in that manner. Well, half the time it works, half the time it doesn't work. Now, here's the big issue that I actually ended up running into, was the simple fact that there is a lot of enemies in this game that either don't attack or don't attack all that often, along with not wanting to attack our minions for whatever reason. Multiple times where I had all of the Skeletal Warriors surrounding certain enemies, and that enemy would not strike any of them, as they're just getting basically ankle bit to death, because I did not increase the damage all that much by the Skeletal Warriors, but they would stand there wanting to attack me, and that's why they wouldn't attack them. Strangely enough, but one great thing is that the Golem itself does have the taunt ability. Every time we utilize the Golem's summoning ability, we'll be able to taunt everything. He'll become unstoppable, and for 30 seconds, or 6 seconds, he'll have a 30% reduction of the damage he intakes. We can utilize this in a lot of different moments, not only for our own survivability, but to inflict a lot of those thorn damage, especially since he's the one mainly inheriting. I'd say, well, once we get into the gear, I'll talk more about how much we'll focus on the Golem itself. But in the certain case that I had some enemies that just were not dealing damage. Originally, I went with just a basic attack and cursing things with Iron Maiden to further increase the damage reflect. And I'll tell you right now, it was a long process in certain moments, killing something with just your basic attack. So I had to implement Blood Surge into this, get in a little bit of those blood abilities. That way we had the killing power to get through some of those packs, or elites especially, that either didn't deal damage or didn't deal damage all that often, enough to the point where it would just be extremely slow. So let's jump straight into the actual skill tree, start talking about the skills you want to utilize with this, then get into the gear, and then showcase that gameplay of how this is actually going to be melting some people and just being able to roll through some of these packs and just inflict a lot of damage from taking a lot of damage. Alright, when it comes to the skills, we're going to start off with Hemorrhage for the simple fact that we want to gain Fortify for our overpower damage, and at the same time we want to create Blood Orbs. Blood Orbs are going to be one of the main things that we're going to utilize in order to heal ourselves, overheal ourselves, and heal our minions at the same moment. When it comes to our core skill, we're going with Blood Surge. Again, another one of those things that's just going to pull in the health for ourselves, be able to maintain healthy at all times, be able to maintain our own survivability, and so at the same time we can kind of get into the pack, take some of those hits, and release some of our own Thorns ourselves and not just our minions, as we're going to be dishing out more of those Thorns damage than our minions will be at the same point. Along with that, we'll also be casting some Overpower. Underneath that, we've got Hewed Flesh. We want to be creating corpses all over the place. Not only is it another way that we're going to be creating some of those blood orbs, but this is something that's also going to be giving our Skeletal Warriors all their health back and being able to maintain them as long as possible. That way we've just got more additional Thorns damage out there. Blood Mist coming up right after that, and since we are using Blood Surge, we will be overpowering pretty often. Not exactly the fastest when it comes down to reducing that 24-second cooldown, but the big thing about Blood Surge, or Blood Mist, is the simple fact that we're going to be utilizing this to create corpses and to get out of dodge in certain moments when it gets a little bit too hairy, but at the same time we will be able to utilize Blood Mist in order to float through some of those tightly dense packs. That way we can grab those blood orbs, because the blood orbs are going to be the main way that we keep the Golem alive. Right next to that, we've got Spiked Armor, gaining another 872 Thorns for all of our minions and ourselves. Underneath that, Skeletal Warrior Mastery, just further increasing the life, and the big thing is just the life of our Skeletal Warriors. Their damage is pretty much nothing. Now, right after Skeletal Warrior Mastery, we're going to get Grim Harvest. That way, every time that we're popping those Skeletal Priests to heal our Skeletal Warriors, we're going to be gaining a little bit of essence back. That way we can constantly be casting, or just have a little bit more essence to cast some of those Blood Surges to re-heal ourselves. Right after that, we've got Iron Maiden. Now, this is just going to further increase our ability to reflect damage, so not only on top of Thorns, but on top of that, any one of these cursed enemies is going to get another 708 to 865 damage reflected on them. That's just on top of the Thorns. But at the same time, we're going to cast this for free, gain essence from it, and the biggest thing about it is we're going to gain 5% of our maximum life from each time one of these dies. This is going to be extremely powerful for our overheal factor, and you'll see why that is once we get to the gear. Now going down from there, we're going to get 1 point in the gruesome mending, because a lot of times we're not going to be below 50% health. There's no reason to have all that increased healing when we're going to need transfusion the most. Blood orbs will also heal your minions for 45% of the amount. This is going to basically keep your golem alive at all times. Not always are we going to be able to get to these blood orbs every single time, but you'd be surprised how quick this actually heals up every one of your minions. On top of that, we're going for Tides of Blood, just further increasing that overpower damage while healthy, and while healthy, our blood skills deal a little bit more damage, helping us a bit more when it comes to clearing out some of those enemies that just don't attack or don't attack all that often. Right next to that, we've got Drain Vitality. That way we're just getting another possibility of gaining Fortify, as Fortify is just going to give us more damage when we overpower, helping us in that moment to clear some of those non-attacking enemies. And on top of that, Necrotic Carapace just for more capability of getting Fortify, as this is something that can proc with the Hewed Flesh every time it spawns one of those corpses. Now just at the bottom, we've got Golem Mastery, just further increasing the life of that golem by 75%. We're going to be gaining Inspiring Leader, as after being healthy for at least 4 seconds, us and our minions are going to get 12% increased attack speed. This is great for hemorrhage. That way we can constantly keep up that Fortify and creating blood orbs or creating essence at the same time. Now just below that, Bonded in Essence. Every 5 seconds, each one of our skeletal priests additional 60% to their maximum life when they're healing. And Death's Defense, huge one right here. This way, anytime that our minions get attacked, even if it's a very heavy hit, they can never take more than 30% of their maximum life in a single damage instance. This means that every single enemy in the game, including bosses, will have to hit our enemies at least 3 times before they can actually kill them. Now, to top this all off, we're going to go with Rothma's Vigor in order to gain 10% more to our life and gain another capability of having an overpowered charge. Now, this can hit with Hemorrhage or Blood Surge, and either way, it's pretty devastating. But let's move on to the gear now. Now, when it comes to our gear, there are 2 things that I have to highlight before anything. They are going to be mandatory for this build. We are going to need a unique of Razor Plates, and you don't have to have it, but Temerity is one that I would say is just going to create overall survivability for this build tenfold. Without it, it's going to be a little bit harder. You're going to be working a bit harder, and it's going to be a bit more clunky with the build. Whereas with Temerity, effects that heal you beyond 100% life grant a barrier for up to 80% of your maximum life. We got 76% on this one. Thank God we got a high roll on this one, and it is extremely noticeable. This barrier, every time that we're grabbing those blood orbs, anytime that we're using Blood Surge, we're gaining Fortify. I mean, we're basically at healthy, and we've got another health bar on top of that. That's almost close to 100% of our maximum life on top of the Fortify. On top of that, overall survivability increase from this one item is just massive, and you just can't go wrong with it. On top of that, we're having the ability to possibly heal and heal more from every healing source that we have by 13%. You just can't go wrong with having this on here. But let's jump straight into the helmet and start talking about those other legendary aspects. Now, the first one we're going to go for is you gain 0.40% of increased armor for 4 seconds when we deal any damage, stacking up to 40%. Now, this one's pretty nice, but at the same time, you could use something along the lines of basic skills grant 20% damage reduction for 6 seconds. That could be another trade-off addition if you didn't have that, or if it didn't feel like it was strong enough. I'm still kind of at a toss-up whether or not the armor is better than the actual 20% damage reduction for the basic skill. In some moments, I'd rather have the 20%, and then in other moments when I have that full 40% stack, I feel like it's helping me more. But at the same time, overall with this build, life would be the thing that I would rather have overall alongside that damage reduction. But when it comes to the rolls you want on that helmet, Iron Maiden's not bad, but I wouldn't say it's mandatory. You do want total armor. You want intelligence, as intelligence is going to be the main stat to actually increase the damage of Thorns. It's the only thing that will increase the damage of Thorns overall. No physical damage, nothing else can actually increase that overall damage output. So you want intelligence on pretty much every piece of gear that you can get it on. But that being said, increase to life, increase to healing from blood orbs is going to be great as well, or just damage from having a blood orb every couple of seconds or every time that you pick one up. You can't go wrong with those. Obviously, Razorplate, we're just going to be socketing in those gems for Thorns. And when it comes to our gloves, I went with each percent of your maximum life you heal beyond 100% grants 0.5% bonus overpower damage on your next overpowering attack, up to 60%. Actually ended up getting a max roll on this one. It is definitely noticeable, and since we're utilizing the temerity where we're constantly overhealing, we're getting those blood orbs from corpses, we're getting the blood orbs from hemorrhage, we're constantly gaining a large amount of health from it. It's just one of those that's just going to further increase our damage output. Now, critical strike chance, I rolled that on this, and I haven't rolled off of it because, you know, it's very expensive to continuously re-roll some of these items, and I didn't want to do that. Your best bet would be either getting Golem inherited Thorns from this, or possibly something that just further increases blood orb healing or blood orb damage. Critical strike chance just isn't going to help us at all, but honestly I didn't need anything else. Attack speed's going to be great, and like I said before, increasing the intelligence is always going to be a must-have for this, as it's the only way we're going to increase that damage for Thorns. Now, Skeletal Warriors inherit, almost got the max roll on this one. That's going to be another one you'd want. Now, the reason we didn't go for Skeletal Mage, you don't want to go for Skeletal Mage inherits Thorns. They're not that great. They sit off in the distance. They're really not getting attacked all that often. Like I said before, one of the biggest issues was some of these enemies just never attack the minions, and the mages are just off in the distance, not really doing a whole lot, just kind of taking up some space, and you just don't want to utilize that. It's not really worthwhile. I'd say the Golem is the number one inheritor of Thorns you want to have rolled on some of these gear. But going past that, we're going into the boots. Now with the boots, we're going to have the maximum number of Skeletal Warriors is increased by 2. Now, one thing you could trade off on this one, which could arguably be better, would be becoming injured while crowd controlled grants you unstoppable for 4 seconds, and this effect can or has a 20-second cooldown. I'm still kind of at a toss-up whether or not just having 2 more of those Skeletal Warriors is fully increasing the Thorns damage output, because there are moments where, with some of those enemies where they have that large swing and they actually have that cleave effect, if they hit multiple, that's going to be multiple Thorns right there, and it can get kind of crazy with that damage stack up if they're hitting multiple. But at the same time, just having 4 of these Skeletal Warriors could be fine, as a lot of the times that I really died viciously with this build was the simple, or anytime playing Necros, the simple fact that I just can't really get out if I'm stuck on Blood Mist cooldown. If I'm getting frozen, God, cold is probably the number one enemy of Necro, is because getting out of that, there's pretty much nothing you can do. Anything that just stuns you, keeps you immobilized, nightmare. And this is probably the only thing that we can utilize in order to get out of that. So it's kind of up to you whether or not you want 2 more Skeletal Warriors or the capability of getting out some of those sticky situations. But when it comes to the boots, I'd say anything damage reduction, anything that's movement speed and intelligence is mandatory. Everything else, you're pretty much kind of like dodge chance could help you, but at the same time, you don't exactly want dodge chance because you do kind of want to take the hit, but having that dodge chance against distance enemies isn't all that bad either. But movement speed, intelligence, and just straight up damage reduction. That's all you're really looking for. Now when it comes to the main hand weapon, I went with Blood Surge's Nova Echoes again after a short delay. The big reason for this is to double up on our healing, as it's only going to give us probably about, I think, 5% health each time that we utilize it. So this way, each time that we actually spend Blood Surge, we're getting 10% health back. So this is going to be something that becomes a little bit more noticeable and just increases the damage a little bit more often. Now with this, I went with the dagger. You don't really have to do this, but I got damage to close enemies. The big thing you want on this one is core skill damage, intelligence, and overpower damage. Everything else could be anything that you really want. Attack speed would be great. Basic skill attack damage or basic skill damage, not too bad. But beyond those three of just overpowered damage, core skill damage, and intelligence being the #1, and hopefully you get that max roll just to further increase that overall damage output, along with the gem being the overpowered damage, is the big things that are going to help you with this. Now, when it comes to the shield, we want a shield with this as it's just going to give us more damage reduction, and it's the only way for us to get another piece of gear that's actually going to further increase our thorns. Now, I got extremely lucky with this roll. I got the max roll on it, and I have been looking at shields ever since I started with this build, and I'm trying to think how many hours I've already put in with this, but it's been more than a few. It's more than likely been over 24 hours in actual playtime. And I have yet to find another shield that's actually better than this one when it comes to further increasing the amount of thorns we can get. I got the max roll with this, almost 3,000 thorns for this one item. I don't know how often this might roll, but I know that these shields will have that base stat always be thorns. So be on the lookout for that, and as well as that, you want flat out damage reduction from close enemies. Damage reduction from distance enemies is generally a good rule of thumb to have on this one. But at the same time, basic skill attack speed, you can't go wrong with that, as that's just going to work out really well with hemorrhage, as it's going to be getting us those blood orbs faster, fortify faster, and essence faster. Now, the imprint on this one is one you could possibly trade off. Now, while you have 7 or more minions, your minions gain 20% increased damage reduction. This is to just further increase the survivability of our minions. But right now, the only way that I'm hitting 7 is by increasing the maximum skeletal warriors by 2. You don't have to do this if you don't want to, because with the skeletal warriors and the golem is how I hit 7. You could try to use the mages if you really want to, but I'm telling you, I didn't have a good time with them. And any time that you have to summon in the skeletal mages, it's not summoning the skeletal priest, so it's not healing the rest of the actual minions. And at the same time, they're floating off in the distance. They're not getting hit all that often, and they have reduced skeletal, reduced inherited thorns, is what I should say. But it just becomes clunky in my opinion, and their sacrifice bonus helps us out a lot more with this build, considering we can get overpowered damage out of it. But if you wanted to choose different options, you didn't want to go for having the 7 and the reduction of damage for them, you could go with the basic skill grants 20% damage, as shields count as armor, and you could also go for possibly you heal for 25 life per second for each close enemy, up to 179 life per second. This could be beneficial. I never tested this one. Didn't have a whole lot of gear to kind of swap around to really give this a good proper test, considering I don't have another one of these. Have 7 more minions and get that 20% damage reduction, especially at a max roll. But at the same time, you could go for damaging an elite enemy grants you X amount of that damage reduction from a barrier for 10 seconds. This can happen every 30 seconds. That could be beneficial for you as well, but considering we are creating a barrier, that's one of those things that I'd say is probably best bet if you don't have these pants. Throw something like this on to help you have a little bit more of that sustainability when it comes to facing off with elites. Now, another way that you could make this trade-off in keeping the 7 or more, if you wanted to have the capability of going unstoppable if you get in or get injured while crowd controlled, is the helmet can also take the increased 2 skeletal warriors. So say you didn't want that 40% increase to armor, you could make that trade-off as well if you felt comfortable enough with just a barrier from the temerity. I believe that's how you say it. Now moving on to the rings. Now the first one we have is the hulking ring. Now this legendary aspect's one to talk about. Your golem has a 4% chance to reduce its active cooldown by 2 seconds and 2% chance to spawn a corpse each time it damages an enemy with its normal attack. Arguably, I could make a safe bet this is probably one of the worst legendary aspects in the game. Not a huge fan of it. Really didn't proc all that often. It's not a huge benefit to me, and I'm going to be real. Biggest reason I haven't traded this off was the simple fact that I ran out of some crafting material in order to actually put this onto something else after trying to upgrade all of this gear. Now, the one thing I was going to trade it off for was whenever your blood skills overpower, you gain 44% attack speed for 4 seconds. This offensive aspect of Rothma's Chosen. I feel like this would be doing us a whole lot more when it comes to utilizing hemorrhage for gaining those blood orbs, getting fortify, and gaining essence back. It would just be much more beneficial, as we're constantly overpowering with this build anyway. But at the same time, you could throw whatever you want on there because this build worked perfectly fine, even though I used that. And I just would not suggest utilizing that legendary aspect for this build because it is not a huge help. But when it comes to rings, we want maximum life, we want fortified generation, and I cannot stress this enough, Golem Inherit Thorn. Every single time, that is the #1 inheritor for Thorns you really want, because that is the main one we can actually force these enemies to actually hit. Increasing his Thorns is just going to give us that massive DPS output when it comes to Thorns. But at the same time, can't really go wrong with having Skeletal Warriors and the Golems inherit Thorns. But on top of that, instead of damage to close enemies, again, this is one that I didn't re-roll because it gets very expensive. One thing that would be great to roll on this would be Minion Maximum Life. That would just create some more survivability for our minions. Moving on to our next ring, we've got the Beadless Needle Flare. But with this one, we have the legendary aspect that's going to benefit us even more when it comes to Thorns damage, as Thorns damage dealt has a 38% chance to deal damage to all enemies around you. Now, one thing to be noted about this legendary aspect, say you don't have a shield that has Thorns, or doesn't really increase all that much Thorns, and you have a couple of these legendary aspects to kind of play around with. You could put this on a two-hander and instead put the Blood Surge Nova over on the ring, and then you would have an 80% chance, if you had the max roll with that Thorns damage dealt, to deal that damage to the enemies around you. So anytime those Thorns damage are being dealt, it's going to be dealing it to all of them around you. An 80% chance is a huge increase. And the biggest reason I wasn't able to test this one out was the simple fact that I just did not have another one of these to throw onto something and give it a good run through. It sounds pretty interesting. I'd probably say it's going to be dealing a bit more damage if you go about it with that route and you don't have something that's further increasing by 3,000 Thorns. So that's one thing to play around with if you have that option available for you. But with this ring, we've got maximum minion life, and it's probably the worst rolls possible. Again, just maximum minion life, maximum life. You want that Golem inheriting it, and fortified generation. Those are going to be perfect for you. Maybe even a little bit of resistances could be beneficial for you at the same time. Now, when it comes to the amulet, this one I would say is your best bet for putting the Consuming a Corpse. Has a 39% chance to spawn a Blood Orb. This is just going to further increase our capability of every time we're consuming those corpses to either raise our skeletons or raise the Skeletal Priest to heal them. We've got the chance for a Blood Orb to spawn, and with 39%, trust me, it's spawning quite often. You'll see it in the gameplay footage coming up. It's really beneficial for us and just gives us that maximum survivability for not only ourselves, but for our minions as well. But with this, can't go wrong with total armor. Sadly enough, I've got Hellbent Commander on here. I thought the minions would be dealing a bit more damage after increasing their overall damage. Didn't end up working that way, so this is a passive that is wasted. I would much rather have this on something of the blood skills, if not just the capability of Blood Orbs just further increasing the health regain for our minions would be something better for me. But on top of that, damage reduction from distant enemies, total armor, total health, and total intelligence. Total intelligence would be the #1 I'd want to grab on an amulet if I could find it. That would be the one that just further increases our overall Thorns damage. Now, when it comes to gems, obviously the ruby is going to go into the weapon. We want that overpower damage for our Blood Surge, and we want emeralds on everything else, as that's just going to further increase our Thorns output. Now, you don't have to do that. You could put some topazes in here just to give us a little bit more damage reduction, or you could possibly put I forget which gem it is that gives us the fortify damage reduction, but you can throw that one on as well. That would be pretty beneficial. And when it comes to the gems inside of your amulets and rings, go based on whatever damage resistances you're low on. As you'll notice, cold damage resistance is pretty much the lowest one I have right here. And everything else, I'm just trying to make sure that lightning and fire, for sure, are the #1s that I have to get the most resistance for, as poison, for whatever reason, is always just going to be melting people because it has that damage over time effect. But now let's go look at the Book of the Dead and see what we need to hit for this one. Our Golem, we want the Bone Golem. Your Bone Golem gains 10% maximum life, and the amount of Thorns they inherit from you is increased from 30% to 50%, just overall increasing that Thorns output. Comes to our Skeletal Mages, we want the Bone one for the sacrifice. For overpower damage is increased by 40%, just giving us a little bit more of that DPS output. And when it comes to our skeletal warriors, we want the defenders, as this will increase their thorns output by from 30% to 40% inherited from us. Now, let's jump over into the Paragon board. Now let's talk about the Paragon board. We're going to go through this pretty quickly. The first glyph socket we're going to put in is going to be Warrior, as we're going to gain Skeletal Warrior's 20% increased armor with this from its bonus stat. We don't need the Warrior damage. Trust me, it's going to be like hitting like toothpicks. It's a bit of a joke in my opinion. But above that, we'll also gain 200 armor. We don't necessarily need the knowledge node on the left. We could arguably go for the resistance to all elements instead of damage, as this is just going to further increase our maximum life. And one thing that you really want to make sure that you're kind of going for when it comes to following along the path is get as many intelligence nodes as possible, as this is going to be the thing that increases our overall damage output with Thorns. Now, moving on to the next board, we are going to get the Hulking Monstrosity first, as this increases our golem's maximum life by 40%. Forget about the damage. They're still not hitting that hard. These minions, bit of a joke. Different build in order to try to fully utilize their damage properly. But beyond that point, there's a lot of nodes in here that are going to give him even more tanky capabilities. So we want that golem armor. We want that golem's maximum life increased. And over here on the next glyph socket, we want to put in Blood Drinker, as this gives us from its bonus Blood Orbs Fortify for 7% of our maximum life. That way, each time that we're picking up those Blood Orbs, not only are we healing ourselves, healing our minions, but we're also fortifying at the same time, just maximizing every possible way to fortify our unit and give us the maximum damage for overpower and maximum damage reduction at most times as we can get. But underneath that, we'll also need to pick up that for the next 10 intelligence just to make sure that we're able to hit this for the Blood Drinker. Moving on to the next Paragon board, we're going for Blood begets Blood. Now, Blood Orbs grant 5% increased damage up to 15% for 5 seconds. Arguably, you really don't have to go for this one. You could go for the Potion Healing, or Blood Orb Healing is the number one thing that I'd go for with this one. We do want to get the 60% overpowered damage, and the number one reason I went with this Paragon board was the simple fact that we could glyph socket in Golem, gaining another 25% increase to maximum life. Sadly enough, I tried to use this socket over on this board, but we just did not have enough of the willpower in order to actually enact that bonus for the 25% increased maximum life. So that's why we've had to put it over on this one. If you get it up past level 15 for this glyph socket, then you could put it on the other, but that's a whole lot of grind just to get that done. So we just want to be able to put it over on this one and gain a little bit of that Blood Orb healing from this and a bit more of that intelligence, and overall just increasing that damage to combat with some of those units that either don't attack all that often or at all. But on that note, let's jump straight into that gameplay, showcase how to utilize this build and how powerful. Now we're back at it in a tier 33 over here in the dry steppes, and sadly enough that old rock's coming back with us, but won't be too much of a bother. Now the first pack we come up on, obviously we'll start cursing everything as much as we can, gaining a little bit of that essence back, but at the same time the big thing is making sure that they get more damage dealt back to them anytime they inflict damage, and watch that bonk right on the head and kills them. But essentially, we're going to make sure that we're always getting that 5% health each time one of these dies. You can imagine some of these larger packs, if we're already at max life, we've got that barrier up from temerity, or however you pronounce it. We're going to be getting a lot of that barrier built up, a lot of overhealing, and just maximizing our overall survivability. Sadly enough, we die because of that rock. That rock, anytime you're right next to it, it essentially makes you one shot. One moon spear got me, but that's the only death we've got on this run. We're almost 10 levels higher, or the enemies are almost 10 levels higher we're facing right now. I believe every one of them's 87. But one of the big issues that I did find is you'll notice everything had a damage resistant aura on it, and now all of a sudden everything seems to be flopping over pretty quickly. That's another one of those issues I kept having before I implemented the Blood Surge. In the beginning, I had, I can't remember what my fourth button was. I think it was like Bone Storm or something along those lines. Something that was essentially useless. But all I had was Hemorrhage along with the Curse, just trying to make a build that essentially would kill things. And fair enough, you can do that with 1 to 3 levels higher than you. You can roll through and all you need is Hemorrhage and the Curse, and you can easily do it. It may take some time, but you could definitely survive it, and you can kill that way if you'd like to. But it became a serious problem when I started to notice how many enemies just would not deal damage, barely dealt damage. It was just painfully slow. I couldn't deal with it. And it just wasn't all that viable. So we added in the Blood Surge, added in the overpowered damage, and now it is completely viable. You're able to actually push through harder content. And it's a bit of a good time. I'll give it that. It's an interesting build. I wouldn't say it's the best build in the game, but if you're looking for something with the blood skills and something to just have a little bit of fun with some of these unique gear and try a different type of build out that is actually viable, that may not be the best, this is definitely one I'd say is one that you definitely want to pick up some gear and just kind of put together just for some good fun. I can't make an argument against it, and in some cases, especially against certain enemies that attack really fast, it can melt them pretty fast. Now, sometimes you will have to kind of like throw yourself at a little bit of a distance. I did this just to kind of showcase their power against elites, sometimes with increased health as well. You'll notice here's one of those that doesn't seem to want to attack the minions, even though he's getting bit up by those skeletal warriors. He's just chasing me right now, not attacking anything else. But if he turned around and just gave one good slap to the golem or the skeletal mages, he might as well just be dead. I think I let him get close enough here in a second to just get one little slice on me, and then boom, he died right on that. Or I can't remember if he even touched me, or if he struck one of the other ones, but he definitely swung in that same moment. But you'll notice they got rid of that spider up above me without even me needing to touch them. Those thorn damage, it can be deadly, but sometimes it can just take some time. But you'll notice we'll just keep heading up, start cursing more of those targets. As long as we're using that golem's special ability, he has a pretty decent radius on it. One thing I also forgot to mention was with Blood Surge, basically almost has like an infinite range. Anything on screen can actually have the blood drawn from it. You don't actually need to be close to get that damage in on them, or at least to pull the health away from them. Now, you want to be close in order to hit them with those tendrils, that little blood surge around you. That's the thing that's going to make the major damage. But even the pulling of the blood from them is going to deal some damage. But the main thing we're getting from that is just simply a little bit of that healing or overhealing at the same time. You'll notice we're already at max on Fortify. We've almost got max barrier. It just maintains really strong along the entire way. Arguably, later on, I may actually mess around with a build that's straight up just me and the golem doing this Thorns build. Take the skeletal warriors out and just kind of go for my own damage reduction. Just kind of see if we can play it that route. But for this build specifically, I just wanted to make sure that it was a big focus on the minions and just try to get that viability out of that build and just have a little bit of fun with it. Because that was the first thing I could think of as soon as I found that Razorplate, was just immediately I want some type of Thorns minion build. I don't want it to just be me, because obviously I'm not a barbarian. We know how squishy the Necromancer can be if you've been playing Necro. It's ungodly, that mobility, the lack of it. But at the same time, we just don't have enough armor or health in order to really maintain in that way. And the only way to get that done is pretty much through blood skills. But here's another one of those moments that really makes it irritating with that rock. Sometimes I wish I'd just read the top of it. Most of the time, these nightmare sigils, I only read the bottom, as long as I don't have like damage multipliers or what is it? Just anything that nerfs me. Essentially, I'm looking at it like Path of Exile, where if it's a map that essentially counters my build, I'm just not running it, man. I'm just going to dismantle that thing and find another one. There's no way I'm doing that. And that's essentially how it's meant to be at the same time, you know. It's a good rule of thumb to read those, but some of these top modifiers with the rock and the electricity coming down and the constant daze, shadow fields, God, man, it's absolutely frustrating in most moments. But now we're going to be heading back. Oh, you know what? Let me speed this up real quick. That's much better right there. Some of those moments, I swear, you really notice how bad the mobility is for Necromancer. But yet again, we're just cursing those guys, making sure, you know, if oh, here's one of those superpower moments. If you can get in between some of those pylons for that electricity, especially if you can get the minions in there, that will absolutely melt these guys. Whoever is pulling that pylon up, I mean, they basically just melt and die. Sadly enough, the pylons on the ground that orbit in circles, they don't really do much damage as a reflective thorns. Not really sure what it is. Even ghosts, for some reason, They don't seem to take it all that much. The archers do, though. Yeah, I love the fact that they started flopping over real quick whenever they were starting to spam every one of their just barrage of arrows at you. Absolute nightmare. But you'll notice how this is one of those builds that can be a bit slow, but do keep in mind this is one of those moments where you can see how much we're kind of chunking away at this health. And that's why I say it's like 1 to 3 levels above us is where you're kind of the most comfortable with this. It's going to have the most speed with it, really reflect the amount of damage that can push out from it, whereas we're at 87 right now, playing as a level 79. We clearly don't have, you know, the amplified intelligence that could possibly given us more of that reflect, and they have those increased health bars, but we're still able to just kind of mosey on through it. Makes it a bit easier, or just gives you a perspective on how powerful it is with these thorns amplified by that much. Now, if I had more Golem and Herod on the gear, who knows? This could probably get even more ridiculous. If I played at it a bit more and kept grinding for some rings and other gear to just kind of really solidify that Golem with close to 80% thorns, it's one of those moments where I'd love to see it if I could just really amplify my own damage reduction and amplify his to just see how powerful it could be as a blood build. So I just don't feel like blood Necromancer is that great. I tried Blood Lance with this, wasn't a great aspect. Wasn't really giving me the damage I was looking for either. Felt clunky. It just wasn't a good time, whereas Blood Surge feels pretty nice for, you know, survivability, putting a little bit of damage out there, and just in combination with something like this with the Thorns build, it feels like good synergy with those minions. But I was sad to the fact that after those Paragon boards, you know, I put some serious damage into both the Skeletal Warriors and that Golem, and I just feel like it's like they're just hitting them with toothpicks. They don't even have mallets or anything. It's like a joke. I don't know what it is, but the Thorns makes up for it. They make them pretty satisfying, especially in moments like this. You'll notice as soon as that electricity starts hitting some of them, boom, start chunking away at that damage. The faster it goes, the more damage it's going to be. That seems to be the case with some of these enemies. You'll notice, especially with these, they're not exactly the fastest hitting ones, but they are hitting at a consistent rate. Like in that moment, he was doing a little bit of cleave, so he hit multiple of the Skeletal Warriors, so it was almost an instant death. Sometimes that has to be the case. Another one of those moments where that rock's just getting in the way. I'm going to slide over to the right. But now we'll go and dispense this next stone, this altar. Kind of a strange ritual over here, but, you know, that's the Moon people. The Moon Clan goats. But typically, I'd be absolutely terrified of those massive goats. I don't know if you've had a serious issue with them before, but that first one at the very beginning, when that thing conked me on the head and I didn't die and it died, there is something extremely satisfying about that, because they usually just hit the hardest. Those guys will just knock you over. They'll stun you onto the ground, slam down again, and do the leap with it. Look at him. He did the leap on that one, killed his own buddy, or at least hacked him down. He was getting a little bit hungry. I don't know. They've probably got cannibalism in this tribe. I wouldn't be surprised. But you'll notice we're just able to kind of do a little circle, do a little bit of that NASCAR going around, making another left turn. We're just coming back around, pop a couple of those corpses out, get some health back, get the barrier back up, pop a few more of those skeletons. The one thing that does seem to basically kill off the minions really quickly is that fire one that shoots off in all directions. That always gets me as well, especially the explosion after the fact that it lingers. It is absolutely devastating. That was the biggest reason I tried to go for a lot of fire resistance before, but unbelievable. It's just deadly. I hate it. But at the same time, it can benefit you in moments like this, because if you do stand in front of those, or the minions do, it does a lot of thorn damage. And Frost seems to be our biggest enemy, no matter what, Necro Life. You know, unstoppable ability. Come on, give me something. Give me something on that skill tree with unstoppable. I don't know, Blizzard. We need something. This, Season 1 needs to have some Necromancer changes for mobility. I know that. They could do something for us. I think somebody in the last video commented if only, Blood Mist could turn into that bat like those vampire guys, those vampire enemies that teleport. I'd love to see something like that. That'd be killer if that was like a legendary aspect or a unique. You know, who knows, Blizzard? If you're watching, drop some Drop some interesting uniques into here. You got a lot of time to get some things right. Or at least fix some of these moments. But still clearing. Doing a pretty good job. That frost guy's still there. But you notice some moments, like, it really does melt. Like in moments like that, when you've got the whole group just clustered in there, it's unbelievable how fast these Thorns can actually kill some of these elites. I mean, you saw at the beginning of the video that one boss unit that, you know, it was like he just kept swinging, kept trying to swing at me, and then as soon as he breathed fire, it was like, boom, it just melted him. Sometimes it's all about that fast, quick succession of attacks, and it's just boom. That's the melting. That's the one that just gets him. But that's why we had to put Blood Surge in. There's too many of these enemies that, whew, man, the big iron giant guys, I can't remember the name of them. The ones that'll shoot down, and they have like the beams of light that come down with some of their little like disciples. Those, they'll just attack once and it'll be massive damage against you, but then they'll take forever to wind back up. I mean, it just takes too much time in some moments. Sad fact of the Minion Storm build is, you know, if you're relying on nothing but the Thorns, you're going to be waiting quite a long time. You're going to have strong survivability with it, but your killing factor, speed, is not always going to be the factor that's in your favor. But as you notice right here, I do avoid these moments where the curses are on the ground because we are at such a higher level. But if we were at something closer to my level, you could actually stand inside of those and deal damage as a reflect from those. They will get some Thorns damage dealt back to them. I did notice that. There's more than a few, and the frost ones that circle around and then explode to freeze you, that can also be one to proc. There's more than a few of some of these modifiers for these elites that can actually deal some damage back. Now, some of them, damage over time effects won't do it, but anything that has that static hit damage, that can be one that actually does it. So we'll kill out this little last pack, and we're coming up on the final boss. And we're going to showcase how we're going to kill this boss with just nothing but the minions. I'm not going to hit anything else. We're just going to continuously allow the minions to get struck on this one. Now, I tried to allow it in this moment, but I was like, yeah, we just need to finish this one off. This isn't the final boss right here. We're about to be coming up on it. After we've killed this last one, you'll notice this is another one of those minions that just barely attacks. Like some of them just stand there. I never really noticed it before how many of these guys don't really actually attack. It's kind of ridiculous. Never really understood it, but in some of the moments where they just be doing dances around you, not even attacking. Just a random moment. Now, this isn't the greatest boss unit to showcase this, but at the same time, it does kind of showcase the overall damage output you can get from something like this. You notice each time he's swinging, it's kind of chunking away at it. It's not doing it in a massive way, but then you'll start to notice when he starts to hit multiples of the targets, that's when it really starts to chunk at that health. He'll start to get some of that poison damage, things that start striking him. And he just keeps slamming. I think it's that initial strike. Every time that he's just slapping. Man. Just like that. One more swing. We finished him off. We didn't even have to touch him. It's quite ridiculous. And it works in great succession with this type of build. With the blood build, in my opinion. I think maybe Blood Necro was always meant to have a touch of Thorns added to that. Maybe it's meant to be with the Razorplate. That could be one thing that just really benefits it. Who knows? It could be one of those things that, is just meant to be. But that's going to be the build right there, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed this. Hopefully this is a build that you come to find as fun as I did. Or, hopefully you've enjoyed the video, because I spent a lot of time just working with this one, painstakingly trying to get this to be viable. Ooh, man. It was a problematic experience, and I'm glad it's done, and I'm glad I got it to be viable. Later on, I'll try to mess with it a little bit more, but I'm ready to get onto some builds where I know I'm going to have some serious damage. Up next, we've got the Black Hole build, and we've got the Night's King build. We're going to be working with a Darkness Frost build, just giving a little sneak peek on what we got coming up in the future. If you want to see more of this content, Hit that subscribe button if you'd like to see some of this live. Head down to that link down in the description. Follow me over at Twitch. We're streaming daily, and we're going to be pushing more and more in the Necro side of things. By the time we're finished with Necro, moving on to Druid, and so on and so forth. We've got plenty of these classes to start working with some of those multiples of builds and getting some leveling guides out there before we get into Season 1, as we've seen some nerfs recently. You may have noticed some footage in the early portion of the game that showed some decent pack density. We might kind of showcase some of those dungeons later on as well. But, let me know down in the comments if you made it this far. What build are you working on with the Necro? How are you liking the Necro? What's your favorite so far? If there's any specific type of builds you've been kind of looking at based on some of the legendaries or some of the skills themselves, just sound off down in the comments. Let me know how you thought and how you think about this build, if you've tried it or if you're interested in trying it. But at that same point, hopefully you've enjoyed, and have a good one.